So you've just got your first Bambu Lab 3D printer and you're wondering how to customize your print settings for models you found on MakeWorld, for example. Well, that's where Bambu Studio comes in, which is a great slicing software for preparing your print files for 3D printing. So today I want to show you 5 simple things you can change in Bambu Studio to improve your 3D printing experience. Hi there, I'm Matt, and I've been 3D printing for around 2 years now, and on this channel I'll be showing you tips and tutorials for improving your 3D printing knowledge and experience. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So first things first, you want to download Bambu Studio. So simply just search Bambu Studio download, and then find the right web page, and then download either for your Mac or your Windows, depending on which system you're using. Also here you can find the download for Bambu Handy, which is the mobile phone app for navigating MakerWorld and monitoring your printer. Although worth noting, you can't do any slicing or anything with this. You can only do that with Bambu Studio. So after you've downloaded and installed, you can open Bambu Studio. And if it's your first time opening it, it will ask you to log in most likely. You can use the same account you use for MakerWorld here, or if it's a new account, you can log in using Google, for example. And it'll probably ask you to add your printer. I've already added my printers before. If you navigate here, there'll be a screen like this. As you can see, there's Bambu Lab printers, but there are also other manufacturers such as Anycubic, Creality, Elegoo, etc. Obviously, Bambu Studio is best used with Bambu printers, but you can use other printers on this slicer too. Much like Orca, for example. Orca's a good slicer for all printers. Selecting your printer isn't actually important for what I'm going to show you, but you can go through with all the setup if you haven't already. So when you open the Prepare tab of Bambu Studio, which is where you can do all the setting changes and slicing your models to send to your printer, it'll look something like this, which if it's your first time using it, can be quite overwhelming. But essentially on the left tab here is where you can change all your settings. However, we're going to stick to some basic. So you might already have a model added in Bambu Studio, but if you don't and you just want to try out the settings, then if you right click anywhere on the build plate, you can see this add primitive, and here you can add a variety of shapes such as a cube or a sphere. And if you scroll further down, you can see some other models you can add, such as a 3D benchy, which if you don't know is this little boat model here, which is a good benchmark for 3D printing to test out the settings you've got. So the first setting I want to show you how to change is in the strength tab, which is the sparse infill pattern, which is all the way down here. By default, this is set to the grid pattern. If you're not sure what this actually means, if you slice the plate, and then this bar here, if you slide it down, you can see inside there this grid shape. This is the sparse infill pattern. It's used to fill the internal parts of a model so you don't have a completely solid model, which would take much longer to print and use much more filament. So this is a good middle ground between an empty model and a full model. So this just provides some internal support and strength. Yeah, as I was saying, the default pattern is grid, which I still don't really understand because grid is okay because it's relatively fast with relatively good strength. But one of the main problems that grid has is that when it's printing, the nozzle will cross over already printed grid patterns, which can cause scraping of the nozzle, which you'll be able to tell if you print a relatively large object using the grid infill pattern. You will hear the scraping noise and it is quite loud. So this is one of the first things I would change is the infill pattern. So if you click on where the infill pattern is, you can see there's a bunch of different infill patterns, which again can seem overwhelming, but a lot of them are very similar. So grid, line, rectilinear, all pretty similar in terms of aesthetics. However, there are a few infill patterns which are good for strength. My go-to is gyroid, because unlike grid, the nozzle doesn't have to cross over the same point more than once, so there's a reduced nozzle dragging on the infill. Plus, gyroid is one of the strongest infill patterns. Also, honeycomb is a pretty good one too for strength. As the name suggests, it looks like a honeycomb, and we all know that bees know best. A few other infill patterns that are interesting are the adaptive cubic pattern, which uses a smart algorithm to determine the density of the infill. This can lead to faster print times. Another interesting one is the lightning pattern, which if I select it and then slice, and then show you can see it's like a very weird looking pattern. It tries to minimize infill usage and filament usage while still maintaining some structural integrity. I never really use this one, but if you've got a really fast print you want, such as a prototype, then you can use this. Other than that, you can try any of these other patterns and see which one works best for you, which one you like most. But I typically just stick to gyroid. I just really like gyroid. It does give a slightly longer print time than some other infill patterns, but the increased strength is worth it for me. So that's the first thing I would recommend changing is the infill pattern. You can always keep it to grid if you want, but I just don't think it's a very good infill pattern. I don't know why it's still the default that's used in Bambu Studio. So the second thing I'd recommend changing is the layer height of your model. So the default layer height is 0.2 millimeters for a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. So this will vary depending on what nozzle size you're using, but a 0.4 millimeter nozzle is the standard nozzle you get with printers these days, in particular Bambu Lab printers. However, if you click on this drop-down, there are other layer height presets available. So if you want a even faster print, or you're just prototyping, you can increase the layer height, such as using a 0.24 or 0.28 layer height. Or if you want to go for a higher quality print, we have smaller layer lines so the print looks nicer. Then you can choose 0.16 or 0.12 millimeter layer height, or even a 0.08 millimeter layer height. Just bear in mind that if you decrease the layer height, you are going to be increasing the print time. However, if you do want your models to look slightly nicer, I would recommend a 0.16 millimeter layer height or even a 0.12 millimeter layer height. I'd say the only time you'd want to use a 0.08 millimeter layer height is if you're printing miniatures like D&D minis. However, at that point, you'll probably just get a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, or you'll just use a resin printer. I usually change mine to 0.16 millimeters, as there's a good balance between appearance and print speed. If you do want to see a comparison, so with the 0.2 millimeter layer height, this model takes 39 minutes to print. Whereas if we change it to 0.16, this model takes 45 minutes. So around 5 minutes extra print time, which isn't a huge deal. So the third thing I'd recommend changing is the seam type, or the seam position. So in the quality tab here, you can see the seam, and by default it's set to aligned. So what this means is when the printer is printing each layer, there's a point at which the tool head has to stop and start the next layer. It isn't just one smooth movement, and this is what causes a seam. So with it set to the default, which is aligned, if you slice your plate, and if you change this drop down to the line type, it's easier to see. All these white dots are the seam. So with aligned, it tries to hide the seam internally, which is pretty good actually. However, you can see some here will be on the outside. That's pretty normal. There are other seam types. So on the drop down here, nearest does something quite similar to aligned. It'll try and align it to the nearest possible point where each layer starts, which again, as you can see from the white dots, is quite well hidden. Maybe not as well as aligned, like there will be some white bits on the outside. Then the other two options are back and random. So for instance, with back, as the name suggests, it will try and put all the seam points on the back of the model, but this is obviously dependent on the orientation. So if we rotated this model, so there's a rotate tool here, or you can press R. If we rotate this by 90 degrees in the Z direction like that, it's now facing us. So when we slice this now with the seam position set to back, you can see it's trying to put most of them on this side, which is probably how you would want it. We change this back to that orientation, just Control Z that. Then the final type is random, which, as the name suggests, is random. It'll randomly place the seam essentially wherever it feels like it. And as you can see, it's like lots of white bits everywhere. However, if you've got a print where you care a lot about the outer appearance, this can look kind of ugly because it kind of looks like little zit points all over the print. So I typically stay away from random. So if it's a model like this, I will leave it as aligned, but most of the time I'll change this to back, and then I'll reorientate the model so that the back is facing away from me. So the final two settings I would change are actually a 2-in-1, which I didn't actually realize, and this is changing the speed of your print, which you cannot do using just the basic settings here. What you need to do is tick this advanced setting, and as you can see, a lot more settings have opened up on each tab, but don't worry about those right now, but you can see speed is now a setting you can change. So the default speeds will depend on the printer. However, there are specific speeds you can change to improve the quality of your print without increasing print time by too much. So for example, this model is around 45 minutes. The speed settings I'd recommend changing relate to the outer wall of the object, as this will be the surface that you see. So if you've improved the quality of the outer wall, the overall quality of the print will improve too. So you basically need to look for the settings which mention the outer wall. So as you can see here, the other layers speed tab says outer wall. The default is 200 millimeters. I would say you can change this to around 150. And if you scroll all the way down to acceleration instead, you see here there's another outer wall setting. The default is 5,000 millimeters per second squared, but I typically change this to 3,000 instead to get the best outer wall appearance. This will be a very minor improvement, but I do think it's worth it for the improved quality of your print. And as you can see, if you slice this, it's only added around a minute of print time, so it's not significant in any way. So just as a quick FYI, under the layer height presets, you can see these presets that say high quality after them. If you select one of these, the gyroid infill pattern gets applied by default, and also much slower speeds are applied by default too. So as you can see, the outer wall speed has been reduced to 60 millimeters per second compared to the 150 I suggested, and also some of the other speeds have been reduced, and the accelerations in particular have been reduced. So the normal printing acceleration has been reduced to 4,000, and the outer walls have been reduced to 2,000. So again, lower than the 3,000 I suggested, but these are much more aggressive in terms of lowering the print speed. So for example, if you slice this, your print time is 56 minutes. This is at about 10 minutes of print time, which is a lot more significant in my opinion. And also you can adjust these speeds yourself too. You're not locked into the high quality preset. But if you're looking for improvement in print quality without having to mess around with the settings too much, you can just select one of these high quality presets and essentially leave it like that. I do think it's quite telling that the high quality presets use gyroid as the default infill pattern, which shows that it is just better than grid, otherwise it would also be using grid here too. But stay tuned, as I will be going through some of these other settings to show you what they do and what effect they can have. So those were my 5 recommended settings to change to get you started in Bambu Studio. Let me know if you found any of these useful, or if there are any other settings you think you should change in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe down below so you don't miss any of my new 3D printing tips and tutorial videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!